Hey guys, thank you for stopping by. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And I hope you enjoyed this interview. All right, welcome back. My guest with me right now, Dr. Uche Igwe, is a visiting fellow, Firoz Lalji Institute for African London School of Economics and Political Sciences, with me here in the studio. Welcome to you, Doctor.
All right, thanks.
And Tajuddin Ibrahim, Director of Research and Strategy at Chapel Hill, Denham, joins us from Lagos virtually. Hello, Mr. Ibrahim, and welcome to the show. Okay, Tajuddin, I can hear you. Please, can you unmute? Okay. All right. Okay, yes, I can hear you. I can hear you now. Now, let me start from Dr. Igwe here. The debates that you've seen, the debacle, the conundrum, the back and forth, the Tom and Jerry kind of situation. And let's also put it that the minimum wage act, of course, has expired. What's your own assessment of what's going on the part of federal government and on the part of organized labor, as well as private sector too, that would be part of the minimum wage when it's settled?
Well, I think there are several strands to the conversation. The first thing to say is that that conversation is overdue. It is important to say that there are very valid reasons to talk about increase in the wage of workers and those who are working, because there's a distinction between workers seen from the perspective of those who are members of union, one union or another, and those who are working. Because I think that sometimes we get drawn into the conversation talking about the welfare of workers. Unions have a right to discuss the welfare of their members, but those who are working are far beyond the membership of unions, and I'll give you the numbers in a minute. Now, another thing I want to say is that the whole conversation around, living wage and minimum wage. While living wage is desirable, I think, my take is that as it stands right now, what is possible is a minimum wage. So I think it's important to sort of focus on minimum wage, which is a possibility, while we also know that, living wage is desirable. Now, let me take you to, some historical excursion. The last time this was done in 2019. And if you recall, that time we settled for a minimum wage of 30,000. You recall, 30,000 naira. And as at that time, that was about $83.
Yes. If we have the slide, we can put it on there,
yes,
because we also did our own research.
Yes,
we have our own research.
Yes, it was about $83. Yes. And today, what we are talking about, the proposals above 60, even, $83 will be about 124,000, thereabout. That is what $83 is today. So if you want to say, looking at, inflation, looking at, the naira and the value of naira, indeed, if you're going to stick to what we agreed in 2019, it is actually going to be 124,000 and a fraction. That is the $83. So we have not left.
In terms of dollar terms.
In dollar terms,
yes.
It will be still 124,000, far above what is being discussed at the moment. So I think that, it would be fair to say between the $83 that was agreed in 2019 and what $83 is today, in between will be what can be possible. In between the 134,000, which is what it is if we're sticking to the 2019 agreement, okay, and the above 60,000 that the government and the president is willing to concede. Okay. Now, I also think, sir, I want to think that there are a lot of other dynamics. We need to understand that the workers who are members of unions are about 4 million. The last time I checked, the number was about 4 million. And when I checked the numbers of those who are working in Nigeria, they are about 60 million. So there are 56 million persons who are working in Nigeria who are not members of labor unions. So I think it is important to understand that while an increase in minimum wage is important, it will impact on organized private sector. And if labor and labor unions are really canvassing for the welfare of the ordinary citizens, they should understand also that when it is this minimum wage is a number that the organized private sector, the SMEs cannot survive with, they will have no option than to share their load. So at the end of the day, the numbers in terms of unemployment, retrenchment, and all of that, will begin to skyrocket. So there will be an implication on poverty, and it will impact that the ordinary people that labor, in my view, are proposing to protect.
Doctor, you just raised a very interesting part for me, which I haven't heard in terms of if in terms of the negotiation, taking $83 it was then, and what $83 is now.
Today.
Perhaps just make it simple and just do the negotiations based on that, but come in the middle, and what the middle will be 62,000. For example, that's 124,000 divided by 262K.
Well, I'm not saying divide into two.
Yeah.
I'm
You
saying,
said a middle ground.
Well, yes, between the 124, that is what $83 is as of today, and this above 60 that is being proposed. Now,
so what would that be?
60 will be about, the last time I checked, will be like $40.
How much is it now, though?
Yes,
1,000,
I mean 1,000.
4,000
Let's approximate 1,500. That will be about $40 and a fraction. So dropping from $83 that we agreed to $40 will be on the low side. And also, you need to understand that there are other dynamics to it. There's a dynamic about electricity tariff. That conversation is still somewhere. There's a dynamic about, of course, fuel subsidy removal. There's a dynamic about 33%. The last time I checked, 33% inflation. Food inflation has gone away. So I think that all these numbers need to be aggregated together, and then let's find the middle ground. The middle ground may not necessarily be 62 naira.
So for you, what will it be?
For me, if the middle ground without being prescriptive would probably be 65, between 65 and 70,000.
Which should be about $45.
Yes, absolutely. And this is still a far cry from what we agreed in 2019.
Okay, 65 to 70K, that's what you're proposing.
That's the way I'm thinking. And, still understanding that, we're just talking about 4 million people. As a result of,
We'll come to that. Let me bring in Tajuddin. Tajuddin, you've listened to Dr. Egwe. What is your own calculation as to how this minimum wage agreement should be reached? And, I communicated with you yesterday in terms of let's take a look at how this minimum wage is calculated. Also, Dr. Egwe, and I guess that is also where this stuff is coming from. How should labor and government approach this minimum wage calculation? And you also mentioned that we are not yet talking about living wage, while other countries are also talking about living wage.
Okay, so I believe that there are a couple of factors that we have touched on, and my view is from a global standpoint. And I say global standpoint because we have to benchmark ourselves to countries across the world to see where are we currently, where were we coming from, and where do we want to head to in terms of this minimum wage, which is basically a way to reward labor for the efforts they put into achieving some certain level of output. And I would like to also at some point talk about productivity, which is something that I think a number of people have been quiet on. So let us start to look at global minimum wage, what basically the World Bank, the numbers published by the World Bank shows that Nigeria sits at the 117th position among 154 countries in the world that the data covered, according to World Bank data. So what that means is that we are very much close to the bottom in terms of what labor earns in this country. If we now capture the current exchange rate, because the latest data by the World Bank is as at 2020. If we capture what we currently have in terms of exchange rate, that number has gone down to only $20, which is at 1,500 exchange rate. What that implies is that Nigeria is, at the bottom 10 of the entire 154 countries covered by the World Bank, data. So the question now is, what can $20 buy? It hardly can buy anything in the current, Nigeria. And I think one thing that really has been, the major factor for the need for an upward review of, this minimum wage is that we have had, several years of, stagnation where the, so this is my slide, and thank you for bringing it up. So if we take a look at it historically, we were coming from as high as over 2,000, dollars as the minimum wage around 1981. And as we speak, if you look at the chart on the left, it shows where Nigeria has traveled over the past, years, and we came down to, the latest number in 2018, which is around, 84 dollars. But if you capture where we are were in 2020, what you will notice is that Nigeria, currently is having around, 75, dollars as minimum wage as at 2020 based on the exchange rate at the time. And I think, that 2020 number, $75 could comfortably be like, a basis for negotiation between the government and the labor, union. And if you look at what, $75 currently implies at 1,500, to naira to a dollar, it implies 112,500 naira, which is what looks like, they should be paying to workers at the minimum wage. If we want to assume that we stay at $75, as at 2020. But if we look at where they currently are now, they currently are at least at 60,000. They have not agreed, but that 60,000 looks like 50% of the level that we were in 2020. And I recognize that, there'll be pressure for the federal government to pay. There'll be pressure also for the state government to be able to pay. So I reckon what looks like 75% of the $75 that they were earning in 2020 could be like the new minimum wage, in my view.
Uh,
And that number looks like 84,375 naira as
okay.
first what they can consider, to think about.
Okay, Tajudeen, just please come again because I'm struggling a bit to hear you too. What do you think? What's your own postulation as to where minimum wage should be? If you're advising the government and labor, doctor said here
So,
between 65 and 70. What figure? Of course, I
so
like that you analyzed the data you sent to us earlier.
yeah, so if we were to talk about, where should they be, I think we can take the 2020 figure of $75 as like, a basis for negotiation in my view. If we put $75 at, current exchange rate of around 1,500, it comes to 112,500. And I said that at, at the current negotiation level, they have at least, seen 50,000 naira as a level that they have to build upon. And the 60,000 naira is around 50% of, $75 at current, in exchange rate. So but I reckon that, the labor union is not comfortable with that. So I think they can consider 75% of the $75, that they were earning in 2020. And if we convert that to naira at the current exchange rate of around 1,500, it looks to me like 84,375 naira is most likely a number that sounds comfortable, that I think the federal government will be able to pay, that I think also possibly some, state governments will be able to pay. So I think the Labour Congress and the TUC in this case, they are just, their action is justifiable because at 30,000 currently, what can that provide in terms of food? Can it provide shelter? The answer is no. Can it provide clothing? The answer is no. So a lot of things have happened around, inflation on food, inflation on non-food products, largely because of the impact of foreign currency exchange rate, volatility on what we consume in this country, and also because we have in the past, couple of years had, negative trade balances, which means we largely speaking depend on import. And if you depend on import, it is negative for your reserves. And if the reserves are down, it is negative for the exchange rate. Exchange rate falling down means we are all going to pay higher prices
Okay.
for goods and services. And I think those are the drivers, and the issue does have to be addressed properly in my view.
Okay. So I needed us to be able to agree on that. Dr. Ochegwe said 65K to 70K. What you did was 75% of 75 US dollars, which was 75 US dollars, I said, now is with 1.5 is about 112,500. So divided by 2, you're getting 84,375. So that is the figure that Tajudeen is proposing, and perhaps we'll now come to the ability to pay. But from what both of you have mentioned now, what you are proposing, of course, there should be a salary increase. The question is, how can we now have a balancing act that we can achieve to get a new salary structure, which labor unions are proposing, that will ensure to fit the current economic realities, inflation 33.69%, exchange rate at close to 1,500, there's a misery index, unemployment rate is high and all of that. How do we now achieve that balancing act between positive and negative economic impact? So I hope you're, Tajudeen, I'll come back to you.
Nancy, I think it's important to make this clarification. What is under contention is minimum wage. And that is the least anybody who is working for 20 days in a month should earn. Now, there are people, many people actually, both in the private sector and the public sector, far exceed the minimum wage. So I think it is important to have that conversation to note that it is the least anybody should earn. People can pay 500,000, 1 million, as the case may be, but nobody should pay below a certain amount. That said, I think it is also important to bring on the table the thing I said earlier about how many of those people who are working, that it will have a wide implication on another 56 million persons who are working outside the labor unions. And it will have implication on SMEs and their ability to survive. And if, for instance, this wage bill balloons to the point that SMEs cannot survive and they begin to retrench, it has implication on poverty, okay? And I really think that for the government to have a grip on the economy, it is important to put on the table the implication of this minimum wage on the private sector and the ability to create and retain jobs at this time. I think that is very crucial. Another thing to also factor in to the conversation is that there are state governments, okay? There are state governments that are able to do this proposal and beyond it, and there are state governments who are even unable to pay the 30,000.
Yes.
So I think it's important to, put on the table that all fingers are not equal. Apart from the private sector, there are state governments who will struggle, and I think that there will be no need getting into agreement that will build more discontent, because at the end of the day, many state governors and state governments have become popular and unpopular based on their ability to cope with the 30,000. Now, if we, my desire is that, it's as high as possible. But if we do it unrealistically, there will be implications on the economy, which could be counterproductive.
How about the arguments that have also come out from a lot of people saying that government cannot actually even afford more than it's proposing or more than it said that the president is committed to, that the government can pay as much as it wants to pay because the government is not spending, is not efficient in his spending, and he's spending frivolously.
Public resources,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. So what is the argument? For example, there's a 90 billion naira for religious purposes, as it were. If
And this
you,
is actually why many people are arguing. For instance, you see the salaries of senators and legislators flashing here and there as a basis to say government can save money to pay more than is being proposed. And that is fair. But what about others? What about the private sector? I mean, for instance, you see people do forget the fact that during COVID, many SMEs shut down. In fact, in the last, exchange rate volatility, many
businesses shut
SMEs
down.
shut down. So I think it is important to be realistic about. I mean, people have just managed to survive from the exchange rate. There was a day exchange rate dropped 300 naira in one day. And what it means is that, for instance, you import at a particular amount, you have to sell, at another amount. So you really cannot predict. If you sell at that time, you will not import again. So you just shut down your. So we need to. If you look at the numbers, many people shut down their shops. We don't want a situation where we have a minimum wage that government can afford, and I know government, would know where to mop up resources and everything, but more than 56 million other jobs will be under threat. I think it's important to sort of put that into perspective.
Okay, Tajuddin, let me bring you in here because you also talk about the issue of productivity. I would like you to explain that further, and I would also like us to look at the ability of states to pay. Vis-a-vis that states are getting more money now in terms of in terms of allocation to them. In excess of, okay, if you're taking a look at the three tiers of government, they share in excess of 1 trillion naira every month. There was even a month that the vice president told us, was it in April or so? He mentioned it on stage at an event I anchored. He said, we had about 2 trillion naira or more than that, but we didn't want to share all, not to overheat the system. So for Dr. Igwe to say here that some states may not have the ability to pay, how do we just suppose that with more revenue that they are getting? And some states have even gone ahead to pay higher than the federal government is paying. For example, Edo State, yes.
So I think we should take this in perspective, right? And the way I see it is, if we take a look at two key elements, the first element is around the removal or partial removal of fuel subsidies. The second element is around the devaluation of the currency. So what these two elements imply is that the government now has more in terms of park allocation to share, and that is the reason, just like you said, the vice president was talking about 2 trillion naira plus to be shared, but they did not share everything. I can understand why everything was not shared because of the impact it could have, because that will imply increase in money supply, and that eventually at some point could lead to inflation. So I really struggle to agree that the state government do not have money to pay to the labor, because my sense is that these days they share more from the park allocation that they get, and I'm not sure we have seen so much in terms of positive changes around what some of these states have done to say, look, I'm not getting more inflow from the park allocation, and these are the projects that are executed on the back of the increase in inflow. We have had this positive impact on park allocation in the park, for like almost 12 months now. So by now we should have seen some state governments making bold statements around what they have achieved on the back of the increase in allocation to them. And that is the reason I believe this the Labour Congress is talking about having more income to their pocket. And let's take a look also at productivity, which is one thing that I know that some states may struggle to pay the minimum of around 84,000, which I think or reckon looks like a good number. Nevertheless, my sense is that they could do something decent, to at least increase the current level. We have heard about maybe the Niger State, if I'm not mistaken, or one or two other states that have implemented some form of increases. I reckon that some other states should emulate this by utilizing the increments they are getting on the park allocation to them. That is one. Two, productivity. I believe that there is a lot that the government can learn from the private sector. Because in the private sector, there is room for assessment. In the private sector, there is room for key performance indicators, which are later assessed, over a period of time to judge whether you are due for an increase in salary or not. So these are some of the elements I believe that the government should also begin to look at. If the labor can be talking about getting higher pay, the question is, what is your productivity? Is it improving over time? Has it changed positively that we should pay you more? So if we pay you more, it means you should also bring more to the table to make the civil service a lot more efficient, from the current level that it is as we speak. If we have that scenario, all of us will benefit from that in this country. So I think, productivity is very important here. Getting higher pay is one good thing, but having more output at a more efficient rate is possibly,
Okay.
more compelling.
Tajudin, let me still stick with you because this issue of productivity, and I don't know if it's also part of the conversation, but for every serious government, it should also be a part of the conversation because productivity is like divide output by input, what your company produces versus what your staff, the resources they put into it. How do you think that the government can come up with a template that would indeed ensure that, okay, if we increase minimum wage, if we increase salaries, these and this and this are what we expect from you as labor from whatever sector that you represent. Then number two, let's take a look at the macro, the macroeconomic stability, just opposing it around figure versus value. Because we should actually also talk about this. This is an economic show. It doesn't even matter how much you pay if the fundamentals are not right. If inflation, if we're suffering skyrocketing inflation despite NPR increasing, yet we're not seeing inflation reduce. If we're seeing high inflation, we're seeing misery index go up and all the indicators are in the negative. It doesn't matter how much you get. 30,000 naira those days, you can buy a bag of rice. A bag of rice was 7,000. You can buy a bag of rice, 3,500, from your 30K. Today, what you're proposing at about 84,000, 80,000 naira is a bag of rice. A mudu of rice, I'm being told now, is about 2,003 or so. A mudu of beans. So how much can the government concentrate on stabilizing the macro so that no matter how much I earn, I can still live well?
So on stabilizing the macro, I think there are some good pipeline of plans, that I have read about, which is around investment in infrastructure, particularly those that will be directed towards in the agriculture sector. One of them that I've read is around there are plans underway to ensure that the six roads that lead to farms. There are plans underway to ensure that they have solar powered food storage facilities in place across regions where we grow food products in this country. There are also plans underway to ensure that they have a good irrigation system for dry season. So if we have all those elements, and importantly, there's an improvement in security in those regions where we produce food. I believe that it will go a long way in reducing the inflationary pressure that we are seeing, because as we speak, food inflation in itself is well over 40%. This is an environment where we also produce food, but we have limited output. Meanwhile, our consumption is rising. So there is definitely shortage in terms of supply and demand. It is imbalance. So for us to balance that, we need to address all these elements around food supply, particularly addressing the supply chain issues. So once that is done, I think the next thing we should be thinking about is how to address the labor. Their demands, I believe, should be met satisfactorily to the best ability of the government. But I reckon also that, the labor, and every worker in the country also has to bear in mind the issues around productivity. So when we bring productivity to the table, what it implies is that you get compensated and higher, and then you also bring a higher game to the table for an improvement in efficiency. How can they go about it across the ministries? I think it should not be uniform across ministries because we have, different ministries. What about the minister in each of the ministries, ministries coming up with a template, working with the farm sec or so to come up with a template that, will list the
Okay.
KPIs of each work of each worker, and then ensure that all those KPIs are met over time, and they set higher targets for them over time. When you meet higher targets, it will reflect in efficiency. When there is efficiency, you will be bold enough to ask for more from
Okay.
your employer. That's the way I see it.
Okay. Dr. Igwe, President Tinubu gave the Minister of Finance an order on Tuesday to submit a template, giving him the cost. When I saw that, I had a bit of mixed feelings, and let me tell you why. I was like, what exactly, what exactly is happening? Is it that perhaps the finance minister was not part of what was happening? I hope you understand what I'm saying in terms of, is it just being brought in? Or, so what has been the negotiation about if there was no template as to cost? And it takes the president to give the finance minister, giving him an order to submit a wage template today, I guess, from Tuesday to now, which is about 48. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think that what is clear is that they have not zeroed into a particular number. You can only give a template based on
A
an
particular
agreement.
number.
Yes.
But I was
You see,
thinking, if they are having negotiations, you should be able to do scenario planning. Yes, that's
well,
what they
well,
call it.
well,
So
for,
what have they been doing with
for
labor?
scenario planning,
Yes.
I
Or
think
they
it's
just go there
important
and
to
just
also
talk and come
gauge
out.
the pulse of labor for you to do successful scenario plan. I'll
From
give you an instance.
615
I'll give you
to
an instance. If
494.
yeah, I give you an instance. If you're looking at a minimum wage of um, 65, I mean, we have heard 65 to 75, and we have heard 84.
84.
So, and it is important, not to go back and forth. I'm sure the president wants the numbers that will pull through, so that there will be very realistic planning, amidst the scenario planning. So I don't think it's out of place. I am also certain that the negotiations are going on. They would have by now an idea of where things are headed in terms of consensus. So that could be the reason. I'm not sure that the finance minister will not be on the loop, because he's the one that will prepare the numbers. That said, I want to also say here that the minimum wage is a law. It is going to become a law, and for those, I mean, there's an automatic implication on the private sector. So it's not like, and my colleague was talking about productivity. That is very, very important, especially in the private sector. But hang on a minute, if a cleaner was earning 50,000 before now, as soon as this minimum wage is agreed at 75,000, automatically, the least paid worker will demand legitimately 75,000. And it's also important to sort of put this side by side with the cost of living. And, you
Which
made
I raised,
references,
yeah.
there's a valid conversation to talk about cost of living. There is also a valid conversation around cost of doing business. At the end of the day, for businesses to, and I'm very emphatic about businesses and SMEs, understanding that very many Nigerians are either unemployed or underemployed. So, and if we are going to challenge the numbers in terms of poverty and Nigeria being, the global capital of poverty and everything, I think it is important to pay some attention to how private sector, those who create jobs, and ILO numbers, indicated that out of every 10 jobs, the private sector will create between 8 and 9, 90%.
Yeah.
Okay? So if we are talking about 90% of the 60 million people who are working in Nigeria, we need to think about how they will survive
Okay.
in the midst of new numbers.
We have 1 minute to go. Whatever they agree, do you think that the new minimum wage will protect workers from poverty in 10 seconds?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that it will be a beginning. There is a raft of things that need to happen. We need to stabilize the exchange rate. We need to make sure that we improve security so that there will be productivity in agriculture. So we need to take certain important policy reforms, including reducing the cost of government.
Okay.
You know.
Tajudeen, over to you. Your own 10 seconds now. What you're proposing, 84,000 or so. How do you think that it would reduce income inequality, which is very huge in Nigeria, and protect workers, or indeed Nigerians, from multidimensional poverty? The SG, Statistician General, is having a meeting right now ongoing here in Abuja around the indices of multidimensional poverty.
So I think, implementing a minimum wage increase will not solve all of our problems. I believe Nigerians, should all bear that in mind. There are a lot of things that have to also be done. What I believe Nigerians should also, be looking at is, what can you do for yourself? The government cannot do everything for all of us.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming and lending your voices to this important conversation. We'll continue to look at that. Of course, the Labour has given government a week of grace. I hope that we don't get back to the nationwide strike because it was such a disaster. Thank you all for being a part of the show. Dr. Oshegwe, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Mr. Tajudeen Ibrahim, also thank you for coming. I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you can be the change that you want to see. Please join me again, same time here tomorrow. Another topic. Bye for now. Thank you for watching. In case this is your first time watching us, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, drop your comments as well as like, and most of all, share our content.